Hi everybody, whoever is watching now. I'm an artist based in Hong Kong. My name is Joseph. And I am a photographer. I'm really I'm interdisciplinary artist. I mainly work a lot with images and objects, and most of the time conceptual interventions. So I don't just work with images, but images are a medium that I work with in order to intervene a certain topic or context. Yeah, and I think it's your turn. Yeah.
And I'm Anna Sellen. I'm multidisciplinary artist too, and photography is my main medium. I live on the west coast of Wales, and my work is around transitions that people and places undergo.
Great, great. And yeah, and I think now we can talk about the sort of the exchange that we've had in the past month. And the reason why we're paired up together is because we're both working on the topic and issue of liminality. And this year's theme of the peer-to-peer festival is, I think, the power of place. And I think we're both pretty interested in the idea of liminal spaces. And the way that we've decided to do this exchange is by having a structure of what we call photo composition and photo exchange. And what we do is that we prepare a triplet of images that were created based on the theme of liminality to each other. And then we would then respond to those three given images with another three images that we've created, also on the theme of liminality. And with actually so in the middle of the process, we actually don't have a very clear conversation on or a discussion on how we're putting together the pairs. It was really more about that visual conversation and exchange. And so now it's actually the first time for us to talk about the images. And yeah, I think, is there anything we should add, Anna?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for this, Joseph. Well, I think liminality is in essence about how we humans deal with change. So in many ways, it's so relevant for the power of place and power of landscape debate. And I think another interesting, curious point that occurred to me whilst I was sort of thinking about our work is how at the core of this power of place program is an art exchange. So art is the best gift anybody could give to anyone. But exchange is also one of the traditional ways of ritual ways of entering or passing through a threshold, which is liminality. So liminality is actually connected very strongly to the whole idea of this art exchange. And it's based on the belief that if to accept a gift is to be bounded to the giver. So it actually makes then a very profound change, profound interaction. It's not just momentary fleeting, it's actually very profound. So I'm looking forward to continuing this work with you, Joseph. It's not just, I don't mean to stop here, because it is creating a very interesting, lasting connection.
Right, right. Yeah, I totally agree. And also how the fact that there was actually a sort of an absence of textual, literal conversation, and rather we have purely visual conversation is actually what's liminal about this. And I think that's how there was this room of play around with the images. But
exactly,
I mean, I think enough talking on the outside. I think we can show the images. And I think we'll start off by showing images that are can you guys see it? Can you see it?
Can we? Yeah, absolutely. It's fine. I can see it. Can we go in reverse order? Because I think my first one was yeah, that's the one. So thank you. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
So this is actually so these are the images that are taken by Anna. And to be honest, I have no idea about the context of these images yet. And I think we'll start by having Anna explaining sort of a little bit of context of these images, and then I will talk about how I'm responding to it visually.
Yeah. So just to explain that for this exchange, I started working on a new project, and in this project, I'm interested in not just place, but human experience, our experience of liminality. And this is the first time that I'm looking photographically at my new hometown here, where I currently live in the west coast of Wales. I study the beach and the seafront as my sort of main focus through the prism of liminality. The beach is the archetypal liminal place. It's sort of well documented and also connects very in a curious way to the way you, Joseph, spoke about anxiety. You said that anxiety is dizziness of freedom. And John Fiske, I know, wrote about the beach as he said, it's the beach controls the desire for freedom, which I think it's a very interesting point for us to kind of look at maybe at later stage. But going back to this project, I worked on it at twilight. So again, that's time between day and night, liminal kind of time. And within this project, I'm interested in spaces in between, but not just spaces as places of physical places, also places of the mind, landscapes of the mind and place. And this image, essentially liminality is about change, how we deal with change. And all three images are following the structure of the rites of passage. There are three phases to the rites of passage, as Van Gennep described. First is separation, then liminality is the middle stage, and then reintegration. So this structure basically is very, very important because it describes the structure of human lived experience. And this first image with the harbor wall and the harbor entrance is my reflection on separation, which is the first stage of this transition. So separation signifies death, departure as harbor entrance, detachment from something, from the previous order. A person is separated from identity, life, structures, roles, and we're not sure what's happening, what lies ahead. It's unknown. The world as they know it ended, and the new one has not yet begun. It's also about, well, staring at the abyss of loss, if you like, loss of the world as we know it, as we knew it. And this image I took also at the time of after the sunset, so at the time when the day dies and the night just about to begin but hasn't begun yet. And it's not, I mean, looking at this place here that is in this image, it's not just the place where the land meets the sea or where the land ends. It's a threshold. So there's always something on the other side. Yeah. So it's a place that kind of has a waiting, a suspense of something that is coming. How did you interpret?
Yeah,
it, Joseph?
I was I mean, of course, I don't know the exact geographical context or sort of the or the idea of the beach, and I was really but I mean, now that you have mentioned it, it's actually very interesting because I was really reading the images by a very visually oriented way. And the way that I do it is this is actually my favorite. So the first one where you have talked about sort of separation and sort of distance or detachment is actually very interesting to me. And I was really reading it visually. And I think that's sort of the liminal part of our project where it's interesting that there was a sort of original context of these images and how I've sort of responded to it with another context. The way that I read this image is actually by the fact that they are taken at night or nighttime. And I was really the way that I responded to it is also to take images at night, but not in the UK, of course, in Hong Kong. And I was there's actually this river that's next to my place that I always walk by whenever I go home, and I was really associating that river with these images when I saw these images that you have given to me. And so the way that I responded, it's sort of by so I went out for a shoot, and then I didn't actually really pick like a specific photo to take, in order to respond to that particular photo. It was really more of an exploration, and then afterwards I was sort of doing the editing. And for me, I was really reading how the images were being placed together, in terms of perspective, in terms of the subject matter. And I like how there was this sort of perspective in this image, but nonetheless, it's sort of this leading lines are actually leading to a ground. So it's actually leading to a sort of flat surface, sort of concrete and stone, um, you know, ground. And it was really not leading us to anywhere
Anyway,
spacious. It was really, almost blocked. And I think it's actually very interesting in that case of how it sort of responded to the idea of liminality, because it was not um it's not about the idea of I mean, at the same time, it could be a threshold to potential or potentiality, but at the same time it could also be quite a state of despair, where you're sort of stuck in the middle. And so I have also taken images. The idea, the approach I've taken with my images is to create images that they're not exactly, that people are not exactly sure of what they are. Like just images that are of visuals or of forms that are just weird, or a bit off. And people are not, I mean, they can sort of tell what they are if you look closer, but at first glance, I wanted my audience to sort of be lost when they were looking at the images, and not being sure of what the context is, and not being sure of what's happening and what exactly it is. And so I've created, sort of in response, images, three images that are sort of visually, that I feel like there is a certain connection between two images. And to be honest, I don't even know for sure what the relation is, but I think that's the thing, because that it doesn't really matter.
yeah.
Um, and I was really doing like, so you can see there's actually some watermarks, sort of at the bottom of the riverbed, the part where it's sort of dried. But it doesn't really matter what exactly it is, as I've said. And these are some tweaks that are found alongside of the river. Um, and I think this is actually the most, again, this is also an image that you might not tell what it is at first glance, but then it might be the most concrete photo in terms of how the subject matter. This is actually a beauty estate that's next to the river.
Mhm.
And there are actually a lot of trees alongside the river. And what's interesting about Hong Kong is that it's actually so dense that you can sort of have a super greenery path pathway, and next to it there's like this super big beauty estate. And there's such a high level of proximity between nature and sort of industrial complexes, that there's there's this weird juxtaposition of the two. And I was really looking into that, into how it's pointing to somewhere,
Mm.
against the image
Yeah.
that you have taken here, which is actually pointing to nowhere. And I was sort of doing that sort of contrast. I was looking to that, to create sort of a visual contrast between the two images. Um, and yeah, and that's how I guess the reason why I put this together is because the lines are sort of echoing with sort of this aluminum lines that are shown in this image, and also here.
Yeah.
Sort of the perspective is the same. And yeah, so that's the idea. What do you feel about it?
Well, I love it. I love what you say about intuition leading you, because I think that's really, really important. And that's the whole point of this program, isn't it? I
Yeah.
found it so it's just absolutely great way. What I've done with the process, with my process, I went out with, I looked at your images. I've had some questions in mind, and I just went out with these questions. And again, I don't think I didn't have to do much apart from this. I just had to open my mind, and suddenly these images, I just knew I needed to stop there, and I had to take just a frame, put it in the frame. I had to frame something else. They just came. So I think the responses from the sea and the beach and the seafront, and my job was simple, to actually just go and record them and find them, but they were there to be found. So, and I absolutely love the contrasts, how you sort of introduce something and continue the conversation. So, for example, with this image, where it points nowhere, you introduce the focal point, which is, I think, is a beautiful way of just continuing this conversation about liminality. And generally, what they are about to me is about our experience. It is human experience. It's not just some theory concept out there on a dusty shelf.
And just one more point, because we only have 9 minutes left, I think, for recording. But just a quick point. I think exactly what you mentioned in a sort of final part of your speech is what exactly I would like to add, actually, or reinforce. I think liminality remains a very highly embodied state. It's not just an idea. It's not just a theory. It is, of course, a sort of theorized term, but it remains a highly embodied experience. And I feel like in that case, photography becomes this very useful tool to capture the state of liminality, because it's really about that sense of immediacy when you're at that position, when you're at that place, and you sort of have to capture it with your sense of immediacy of the place and of what you see and your perspective. And I think that really comes in hand to hand with the idea of liminality.
So this is our second exchange. We've got 6 images to follow, and we started with your images this time, Joseph. So would you like to tell us? Yes, please.
So I've actually given 3 images, and they are also part of another series that I'm working on. It's simply called Untitled Liminal, because I was sort of trying to capture the state of liminality. So not just geographical liminality, I guess, but also in terms of mental liminality or psychological liminality. I actually didn't mention this, but also I think Anna did mention it for me. But I was working with the topic or the theme of anxiety a lot. So this is actually a photograph that I've taken at the Quarantine Hotel back in Hong Kong. So I was traveling last month to Basel, and I came back, and while the world has ended, the whole quarantine thing, Hong Kong is still going on with it, and I was forced to stay in the hotel for 7 days, and I feel like the quarantine hotel is almost like this really liminal place where you're stuck in there temporarily, and psychologically you're in that liminal state where I actually didn't do anything productive during those 7 days, because I was stuck there, and then it became this sort of I remember telling myself that let's not do anything because it's only quarantine and I'm only here temporarily, so let's take a rest. And so it was really at a state where I feel very much liminal. I feel very much stuck, but also it became this excuse for me to not do anything, I guess. So I think there was this paralyzing effect of liminal spaces, because when you're in there, the sort of weird position that you're in sort of gives you an excuse of just freezing, of not doing anything. And that's why I've included this image in there, and the context of it. It's that. And then next image, I think we can go on to so this is actually an image that I've taken in a car park next to my place, and I feel like car parks have always been a very liminal space, because it's it's only a physical, it's a very spacious and very physical presence, but nonetheless cars are just coming in and going, and it's truly a place where vehicles are not there to stay forever. It was never permanent. It was meant to be a temporal, it was meant to be a liminal really place for cars and people to come and go. And I find those spaces, physical space, very interesting because they're very spacious. They have a very clear presence. Yeah, and then lastly, I have this image. This is actually an image that I've taken again in Hong Kong, actually in a city center of Hong Kong. And I think what's interesting is that in Hong Kong we have this idea that it's a super mega city. There are a lot of buildings, a lot of skyscrapers, but there are actually a lot of this kind of green spaces in the middle of the mega city. So you sort of have this liminal, rural sort of uh, section of the city where it's actually full of trees and plants. And that's why I've taken this image. And also it was, this image is actually very visually is actually very intriguing because you can't actually tell what it is at first glance. And then later on you figure it out it's actually a bunch of trees. And so I feel like that's also what's liminal about it. So something that's visually liminal, also conceptually liminal. So those are the three images I've given to Anna. And now I think it's Anna's turn to.
Thank you, Joseph. I think they're fascinating. When I got them first, I just they created such a amazing flow of just desire in me just to go and respond to them in some way. And so my first response, in response to your hotel image, which is I'll find, yeah, there it is, very powerful, very strong. And so I've responded with this. And again, I didn't have to do much to think about it. I didn't think about it. I just went out and it found me somehow. And what it is to me is, again, it reminded me of John Fiske. He talks about the beach and the sea as text, okay, and the wave as text. And here, the wave is constantly shifting. It's never the same. And he said it was rereading itself and needs to be reread. And that rereading really chimed with your image to me. And I thought of this as this is a wave carved out of stone, basically. A stone wave is a paradox in itself. Liminality is quite liminal. But also it's in motion and it's still, it's fluid, yet it also solid. And it just reminded me the endless tides of thoughts and feelings that we go through when we lay in bed restless, and that state of limbo when sort of all of this is shifting in your mind. There's nothing solid to me about liminality and nothing solid about our experience of being in there, in that limbo state. So even when it appears to be stone, it's still very fluid, very unfixed, very unpredictable. So I think in this image for me, this is not just physical landscape, but it's seascape, I should say. It's a seascape of mind, really. It is flowing, it's withdrawing, it's flowing in and out. It's just in constant need to be reread. So this second image, the non-place, the car park, well, I responded with an image from a car park here locally as well. I think, so this image to me is an absent, vacant kind of space, lacking identity. There's nothing to hold on to in it. There's no indication where it is. It could be in Hong Kong, it could be somewhere in the UK, right here where I live. So, but I wondered when I looked at it, what it is like to actually be in this space. What is my experience? Well, it tells me about this experience, but what would it be like if I'm in this non-space for longer, not for transitory, like short period of time, but kind of for longer? What it would feel like to be a non-person in a non-place? So I responded with this. This is also a car park, okay? So this image is of a living thing in a non-place. This is not a kind of space you'd find on the postcards about this tourist seaside town that I'm living in now. This is probably the weirdest and less purposeful non-place I've seen around here. It's a traffic island in the middle of a car park, very large and underused car park right in front of the sea. So the sea is just here. and it's basically finishing at the beach, but not many people know about it, so it's always empty. And there's this bush in the middle of it. People don't notice it. It's almost like a punctuation mark. You only notice it if you reverse into it by mistake. It has no real purpose. And I wondered, yet it's a living thing. So as someone who was born in a country that no longer exists, as someone who's actually, I'm a dual citizen. I belong to the two countries and to none at the same time. And as someone who now lives in a country that just gone through this Brexit departure, which is very painful and shocking, and is also about alienating and being on an island. This traffic island with no purpose in it reminded me just of what it's like to be a non-person in a non-place, or somebody whose identity is constantly shifting and moving, and at the same time stuck almost in among alien kind of environment, between states, between policies, between opinions, between identities. And I think looking at this, I wonder if this transitional space become permanent or becoming permanent, what is it like to be in it? So that's my response. And just very briefly on the final one, I find this image, Joseph, fascinating. I think it's absolutely, there's so much in it. What I read in it is, well, many things, but anxiety. Again, lack of direction, lack of guidance. You don't know where to go. What is it even? Is it a cobweb? Is it some fungi? Is it vegetation? Is it concrete? It's all of these things together. It's somehow suffocating. It's foggy. It's uniform, but it's not at the same time. So it kind of gives me feelings of loss of hope, general loss, anxiety, but yet at the same time, I've responded with something that seemed to be quite hopeless, isn't it? We're going from trees and vegetation to actually them becoming ash. So almost death. But I kind of weirdly, I see it as differently. I see it as there is this uncertainty, but this space of uncertainty creates a play, creates a chance for liberation from this structure that is like gray and uniform. This sort of gray uniform structure kind of needs to be broken. And so I'm breaking it, becoming ash, just quite radical. But it's still a breakage, a breakthrough from this structural uniformity. Yeah. And I mean, liminality is the space where we just might experience freedom. It's not all about danger and doom and gloom. It's about freedom. It's the place where we can negotiate our roles. We could renegotiate our roles. We could forge new identities. And this is a new identity of the tree, a tree becoming ash, a carbon cycle, becoming a paper, becoming a book, and then burning down to ash. So there's a whole cycle of development here, and what you see is not necessarily what it is. It's very hard to read, because this is not just negative, it's positive too. So it's sort of many things in one, it holds many things in one image. So that's my response.
Anna, I really love your images, and I particularly I actually love the image of the rocks. And the reason why is because I think you mentioned how they're like waves. They're like the fact that it's almost like we're reading the ocean, and I think it's for me, I think there's almost I've actually read another that image from another perspective, even because I think it's I like how you have talked about even rocks are fluid in a way. They're liminal in a sense, but also I think there's, if we're to look at it from another perspective, liminality is actually something that's very hard and concrete and blunt in a way. You know, it sounds like something that's very fluid. It sounds like something that's very, I mean, of course, there's a certain freedom in it, but also how the fact that it's just the blunt truth that the world is liminal, and the world is just indifferently blunt when it comes to uncertainty, that there is always this uncontrollable uncertainty that we have to face. And in that case, it's almost like this concrete piece that we have to bump into because we don't have a chance, because it just exists, it's just the fact that there's nothing, we cannot be sure of anything.
Mm.
And I think that's the scary part of liminality. Liminality is actually, scary, or anxious, making people anxious, not because it is fluid, and it's, it is actually because of the fact that we cannot change it, and there will always be uncertainty. It's almost this blunt fact that we have to face uncertainty in our life, and there is never something that we can be sure of. And I think that's, that idea of sort of, yeah, that slowly, I think also go down the path of your other images. I think it's also interesting how, of course, you can embrace the fact that the blunt fact that there's always uncertainty, and there is never something that you can be sure of, and then in a way, but you can embrace it by taking it as a potential, as a way to go beyond, and to sort of look at it from another perspective, and to embrace the potential of liminality, and sort of to decolonialize um where you are, and yourself as well, and sort of to embrace the potential of what you can be. And I think it's, in this case, I think, I mean, putting everything to the side, I mean, all the theories, if we just look at the images visually, I think they also come very well together. I mean, in terms of the color, in terms of the tone, and how it just, and I feel like that's also what's, that's the liminal part of our exchange, because it's also not just, I mean, theoretically, I think there was something that's really corresponding to each other, but also like visually, there was something that's really intriguing, in terms of the form or texture, or how they are visually creating this accord that's that cannot exactly be literalized in a way, but nonetheless they can be experienced, and they can be embodied.
Mm.
Um, yeah, yeah, and I think
That's
it's a great, yeah, it's a
fantastic.
great
Thank
process.
you. This is so much I've taken from this conversation. It's just lovely to have this exchange. But I noticed again, as you pointed out, how much concrete we've got in the images itself. I mean, we've got
Yeah, right.
stone,
Yeah,
concrete, and this looks like concrete, and this
yeah,
doesn't have concrete, but we know it's surrounded by concrete buildings. It's interesting, yes. And I mean, as you know, my the project I've just finished is about nuclear bunkers, for example. Again, another example of liminal space, place full of concrete. Concrete is a liquid stone material that is liminal. It has fluidity and, as you say, bluntness about it. It's just so true, and I'm just yeah, it's truly fascinating. And it's very,
yeah,
as you say, it's it has huge potential. The potentiality of liminal place and the experience of being in it, the potentiality of it is great. It's actually fantastic for art as we see it, because we are sitting now, as we are, looking at each other, but we are miles apart.
yeah,
And in between us, there's this screen and a huge liminal space in between the two screens.
yeah, for sure,
So
for sure.
yeah,
Yeah,
and that whole exchange was the liminality of that. It's always there, basically, right in between us, isn't
mhm,
it? And look what
mhm,
we're making out of it. It's fascinating. It gives so much power. So we better
yeah,
harness it and
yeah.
continue harnessing it.
Definitely, yeah, yeah. And I think it's just, honestly, I've never had such an exchange. Like, I've never worked in this way, but I think that's it's nonetheless a very interesting process. I'm really interested in the fact that how the whole process of exchange in itself it's a very liminal process, because of how we're position it, but also how we're doing this via Zoom or via the internet. And that's like, I mean, there's always this very liminal part of our exchange. I mean, whenever we talk, I mean, when we're talking to each other, when we're speaking to each other, there's always this delay between my speech to you, and vice versa. And there's also this process. I always feel like when I talk via Zoom, I'm just not sure forever that whether the other person actually listened to me uh, as you know as good as when I'm speaking to them in person. And I think there is always this uncertainty in my speech that I sort of have to slow down myself sometimes, or I have to sort of I cannot just speak as fluently as I am in person. And I feel like there is always this anxiety that's pulling me
Yeah,
behind, you know.
I can
And I feel
totally
like
relate to it.
yeah. So like you feel like you might slow down sometimes in your speech, or you have to figure it out that you're just not sure whether the other person listened to you, in the same way that they will have listened to you in person. Um, and this sort of the lack of tangibility in the conversation and in exchange, it's even less concrete or certain compared to our visual exchange with photos, right? I mean,
Mm,
like you would have be sure you'll be sure of what you're seeing in images and how you could respond it with visuality, um, through images.
mm,
And that exchange will be much more concrete and much more certain compared to the speech that we're having now, or the
yes.
conversation that we're having now. Um, and yeah, and I feel like that's also sometimes the power of photographs or still photographs, because there's always this certainty that you have that you don't actually have in moving images. I mean, you can go to the film, you can go to a movie, but there is always so much fluidity and there is always so much movement that you're not sure of. But with still images, I mean, there is definitely less information per second, but the thing is, at least you have something that's certain. At least you have something that you can see and you can look at, that you can
Mm.
that's frozen. Um, and I for me, that's why I think personally I've always preferred still images over moving images. Um, and yeah, I think somehow moving images make me anxious. I
Yes,
think
yes.
physically, it would also make sense physically why it would make you more anxious compared to still images. Um, but yeah, I think maybe that's also why. I mean, because it sort of offers you a sense of comfort, you know. It's okay not to know what you're looking at, you know, perfectly 100%, but for sure it will be staying like that. Um, and the fact that it's still and concrete, it's just comforting in a certain sense. Yeah.
Mm. But you're absolutely right about photography being the right kind of medium, an interesting medium to engage in this conversation about liminality, because photography is a liminal medium
Yeah.
as it is. A photographic camera is essentially is the same as the box inside it. What's happening inside it is a liminal space. But
Yeah.
a photograph is something that is trying to capture the moment. As soon as it captures it, it becomes the past, yet it's in present and has so many meanings. It's just the right medium because of
Yeah.
its liminal
Yeah.
origins as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely spot on, spot on.
Yeah, definitely. And also how cameras or photography in general as a technology, as a science, it's almost like this effort that has in the very much beginning, in the origin of it, it's actually just a science or an effort to counter the liminal world that we're in. I mean, the fact that we're
Mm,
trying to, well, in the first place, we wanted to keep something forever.
yes.
It's just, it's really just an effort or to really counter our anxiety of losing something, you know. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, it remains the images that they created, nonetheless reinforces the fact that we're living in a liminal place. Because even if you have an image, even if you have a straight shot of something, you can never be sure of, even if you have something that's realistically in front of you. And I think that's the sort of paradox of photography, because you can have an image of something that's really abstract or visually weird, but nonetheless, it's actually the real world. And so for me, it's somehow interesting because it reinforces how liminal the world is. I mean, the image, for example, the image in the middle, I mean, with all the trees and my image and sort of in the middle, where you're sort of lost. I mean, it's nonetheless a straight shot of the reality, uh, but it's so liminal and it's always uncertain. We're always uncertain what exactly it is. Um, and I think that's sort of the paradox and also the power of photography in a way.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Great.
Well, I'll stop sharing now,
Yeah.
so we could see each other
Yeah.
a little better.
Great.
That
Great.
was amazing. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
this.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's almost time to sort of wrap up the whole thing. I guess
Yeah,
I mean, we can
definitely.
always go on with the conversation, but I think for the ease of watching the conversation, it's great to have it sort of end.
Contained.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah. So I guess I hope whoever is watching this video would have enjoyed our conversation and our exchange. I think this video was not meant to be sort of like a very well presented or concise video of what we're doing. I think it was more like a process that shows how we're exchanging with each other and how we're talking to each other through images. And yeah, I hope whoever's watching would have enjoyed it. Anything to add? I know.
Well, do get in touch if anybody's interested in liminality and exploring it, or want to continue this conversation in some way. I'd be up to it. I'm sure we both would say would be very interested to hear back from anybody about what you see and what you hear. And there's more to it, I'm sure. And I would love to continue working on this theme. I found particularly the exchange as we made it happen is absolutely amazing process, and really, really interesting. I'd like to continue with it. It definitely has a lot of creative potential, just massive potential. It's great. It feels
Same for
very
me
good.
too, I think. Yeah, I think it's a great exchange. So thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for